Dear Father in heaven, Father, we congregate this evening as we anticipate the opening of the Sabbath hours. And we're so very grateful, Lord, that you've brought your people together this evening. You've brought us from great distance, but we want to be drawn closer, Lord, that distance wouldn't matter, that we would be closely bound by your truth, that nothing would ever separate us. So as we plan to worship over the next few days, we pray that you would be amongst us. We pray for the Holy Spirit, that as we talk and walk together, that we would learn from each other. We pray now for this hour that you would especially pour your Holy Spirit out, that our eyes might be opened. Things that we may understand, maybe just in repetition, we would have greater clarity. We pray for those that may still be travelling, those that are caught up elsewhere, may you be with them. We pray for those across the island that are preparing to meet with us tomorrow. May you be with them also. And all those that we represent. Father, we thank you for the light that has been poured out upon us. As we bathe ourselves in that light now, we just give you our hearts and our minds to be rededicated and converted to the purpose that is before us. Prepare us, Lord, and we give you everything we have and everything we are. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, it's nearly happy Sabbath, but happy preparation of it, yes. It's really, I can't tell you what an honour it is to be here and to put faces to the names that I've heard so much of and given such a wonderful report of. I hope you realise how much you are loved in different parts of the world. So it's just us tonight, and I thought, well, you know, we can go over some things together. As I was travelling from the airport yesterday with Sister Susie, we were talking, and I made a confession to her that, I don't know if it's good to start off a presentation with a confession, but I have struggled all these years to understand these lines. I came into the message, I can't remember, it was around 2005, 2006, and I heard Elder Jeff, I heard 10 minutes of this man on the internet talking about Daniel 11:40 to 45, and he mentioned the 25:20, and I was sold. It's like, sign me up. I needed to know what this man knew. So I started listening to him, and then it wasn't until about 2011 when I realised, we realised, my family and I, that we needed to start teaching this message. That was when we met Elder Parminder. So between 2006 and 2011, all I did was hand out DVDs. Somebody had given me a DVD burner, and I just burnt them, and I gave them out to everybody. And they did very little. I think the landfill at home, the tips are full of DVDs. But it wasn't until we were put in a position where we had to start teaching it that I started really learning it. And I would teach Daniel 11:40 to 45, the time of the end version, and the 25:20, and all those things. I didn't really see the connection between them all, but I would teach them. And when it came to the lines, you know, we teach Islam and certain things, but when it came to the lines, I was only very general. That green chart that's behind you, it was just very complicated to me, and I couldn't teach it simply. I guess because I didn't understand it simply. And it wasn't until this midnight cry message that it's really become a lot clearer to me. I can't say I understand it in all its intricacies, but it's just pulled it apart and given it a clearness that I never had. So I was only ever very general in the way that I shared the lines. And then when the Midnight Cry message came, and we learnt about the hand of God. I mean, how simple is the hand of God? In Ezekiel chapter 1, we're told that the throne of God sits upon 4 wheels. And those wheels go round and round and round, and there's 4 of them. And Sister White says they represent the complicated play of human events. And what's the word we use for human events? Human events in the past is history. So it's the complicated play of history. History is repetitive. It goes round and round and round, and it's complicated. So how do we uncomplicate it? If you can picture history as a wheel, and there are 4 wheels, and then there's these spokes, and it goes round and round, how do we uncomplicate that? Well, we've got to break the line and open it up out flat. Once we make it flat, it's still complicated, because what we need to know is, well, where do we cut that line? If you cut it in the wrong place, you're going to get a wrong piece of history. So we've got to cut it in the right place. And we know where to cut it because of Daniel 11:40 to 45. We've got to cut it at a time of the end. And we've got to end it at a second advent. And once we do that to any line of history, it uncomplicates it. And so, you know, when we think of, and we teach our children this, don't we? We say history is what? His story. And stories have to be short or they're boring. When a story gets long, what happens? You fall out of a window, right? So God's got to keep us awake, and in doing that, he cuts up his stories into little bits. And he cuts them up, he's got to measure them, and he measures them with his hand. He starts with his thumb and he ends with pinky, or he starts with time of the end and he ends with the second advent. And you cut it up in portions. It's like you can't go and watch a huge long movie. You've got to watch it in sequels. So God gives his story in sequels, and he uses his hand to measure it. If you go to the Old Testament, everything's measured in a hand breadth. You know, cubits are hand breadths. So once we get this hand breadth, and we learnt that it was every hand breadth was 5 waymarks. We know 2 of them. All we've done is added 3 extra waymarks. So where do we get these waymarks from? What was the next thing we do? So we got the simplicity of the hand breadth and the 5 waymarks. Now we've got to label each waymark. What labels are we going to give these to? We go to what book? We go to the Great Controversy. So we go to the Great Controversy, we know what these 2 are, because she gives us the time of the end as 1798. She gives us the second advent, and then she gives us, what are these 2? Sunday law and the close of probation. We go back into Millerite history. Oh, no, sorry. Great Controversy also gives us this one. What am I saying? Great Controversy gives us this one, and it's October 22, 1844. And we build that all from the book that is our bread and butter, the book that makes us Seventh-day Adventists, can give us these 5 waymarks. She also gives us something else in that book, because we learn that between the Sunday law and the close of probation is what? A loud cry. And if we read through that chapter carefully, we see that that loud cry is going to swell. So we can see that we can now go within these landmarks and get more information. So you can't, that's pretty simple when you take it back to its bare bones. And then, because of our understanding of Daniel 11:40 to 45, we can now say that the time of the end is also 1989, and we can also give that as 9/11, which we'll talk about hopefully later on. And then we've still got Sunday law, close of probation, and second advent when we've made application. And then when we see that this develops into the loud cry, and we also know when we go back, so in this history here, and then we go back into this history and we go to Daniel, and Daniel tells us at the time of the end what happens. Knowledge increases because of what? At the time of the end, what gets unsealed? The book of Daniel. So, I mean, every Adventist, you know, we know that. We've always been told that the book of Daniel is unsealed at the time of the end, which is the increase of knowledge. Because if something's unsealed, you're going to learn more about it. And that's going to swell until we get a loud cry, so to speak, in that history. So what we've got from the Midnight Cry message is not only taking these lines back to bare bones, but also showed us these repeating patterns. And when we see the repeating pattern, that God is just doing the same thing over and over again, then that makes something simple as well. So let me rewrite that again. And we're going to draw this line up here. And we give this line a name, don't we? We call it the line of the 144,000 from the Book of the Great Controversy. And we'll go time of the end. And I'll put 1989 up here. And we'll put these ones: Sunday Law, Close of Probation, Second Advent. And I will put 9/11, understanding that in her reading that was 1798, and that was October 22, 1844. So once we see that simplicity, it can help us to understand all the other lines. The other thing that has helped me too is understanding that not every line is a reform line. So what are the reform lines? What makes a line of history a reform line of history?
It's going back to what God, or some people is going back to what God had purposed.
We're going back to what God had purposed. So obviously God's people had made a detour somewhere, and they've got to go back, or they've got to reform. So a reform line is when God's people need reformation. So we understand that there are four main histories where God's people needed reformation: beginning ancient Israel, end of ancient Israel, beginning of modern Israel, end of modern Israel. There are four histories where reformation had to take place. So if we looked at the history, another portion of history, say World War I, is that a reform line? No, it's not about reforming God's people. But we can still take our template, put it over that history, and bring that information down into our reform line to give us more information. So not every line of history is about reforming God's people. But when we are reforming God's people too, we understand that God is doing it in steps that are repetitive. So in between these 5 waymarks, we've got this increase of knowledge. We call this the formalization of the message. So the book is unsealed, somebody's got to discover it, there's got to be information that comes out of it, and then somebody's got to package it so that we can understand it. And then what do we call this waymark here in relationship to these two? Increase of knowledge, formalization, and then what happens? A test. Then it gets tested. So we've always known that that's what happens in this dispensation between the time of the end and 9/11. We always knew that that's what happens between the Sunday Law and the close of probation. And all we've done really is said, well, that's what happens in every dispensation. Once you see that, it's just a simple pattern. Break things down into patterns and they're not near as hard. So then the other light that we bring to this is the idea of fractals, and that God's reforming his people in steps and groups at a time. So when we, before we go there, this is the line of the Great Controversy. And so this Great Controversy was given to, this understanding of prophetic offence was given to Ellen White towards the end of her ministry. But what was she given at the beginning of her ministry? Where do we find those visions? In early writings. So what if we took early writings and made a line? And I'm going to write early writings. This is the end of her ministry. This is the beginning of her ministry. So this is the 144,000. This would be the line of the Millerites. And what I want us to consider here with these waymarks is not the ones we ordinarily think of, but what would have been the external events if you were living in this time. So not the things that were happening inside the church, but the major events that would be happening outside the church.
Starting from 1798.
So we would put 1798 because that's an external event, isn't it? So we've got the infliction of the deadly wound, we've got the rise of the United States, we've got the French Revolution. There are external events that you can latch onto at this waymark. Then what would be the next one? That if you were outside the church, what would you see? Yeah, I'll go with August 11, but yes, there were stars falling, but we'll go August 11, 1840. The fall of the Ottoman Empire. That was a pretty major thing. So we've gone from 1798, and we're going to jump, 42 years to August 11, 1840. So let's do the easy ones first. You always go for it's like a puzzle. Put the easy ones in first. When you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, you do the edges. Don't go for the sky. It's too hard. So this is what in the Millerite time period. This is going to be the second Advent. What do we know? What can I put there for the second Advent? 1863. Okay, and you all understand how the 2520, that beautiful chiasm, if they had have understood that, kept that to that understanding that prophecy and increased in knowledge of the understanding of 2520, they would have come to an understanding that in 1863 Jesus would have come again. So that would have been the second Advent. So what we need is a Sunday law and a close of probation. What other major events, if we were to go into the Millerite time period based on early writings, could we place as the Sunday law and the close of probation? See, that's not external though, is it? So the church, what even did the church see? So nobody saw anything. So what civil war starts when? And what did Sister White refer to that war as? The wrath of God. It was a plague. So we're going to put that here in 1861, which is the beginning of the Civil War. It was a Jacob's time of trouble. It was a plague. So what are we going to line up here as a Sunday law? So what is the Sunday law? It's a law. A law concerning what? According to the Great Controversy. It's the Sabbath Sunday issue, isn't it? Sabbath versus Sunday. So where do we get the Sabbath from? Yes, scriptures, 10 commandments. It's a commandment. So it's law. It's a part of the Decalogue. And we know it's what commandment? It's the fourth. And those first four commandments have to do with what? Our relationship with God. When we come down into this history, we're going to have to look for an event that has to do with what? Law. In this history, what was the major event externally that had to do with law? And when? In 1850. What happened in 1850? No, that you're thinking of the 1888 time period, so that's 1890s. So, but if we could do a line for that too, for that history, but this is earlier, 1850, and it's a law that's going to test God's people. So this history here, if the great controversy narrative was going to happen in her time, would have been an issue concerning what? Sabbath versus Sunday. That's what the issue was. It would have swelled. There would have been agitation on the subject. And then, people would have been brought to a decision here on what subject? This subject. So whatever happens at the close of probation, it's the test for what has begun here. This has begun the increase of knowledge on Sabbath versus Sunday, and then you would be tested on Sabbath versus Sunday. So given that this is the beginning of the Civil War, then what's this about? Slavery. What did you call it? Fugitive Slave Act. So if we go back to here, you've got people going around just living life normally, doing their thing, and all of a sudden this subject gets agitated, this Sabbath Sunday issue, and you're going to find out that if you didn't know already that the Sabbath is of God and Sunday is man-made. And then there's going to be an increase of knowledge on that very thing. So you're going to have to decide, well, if that's God's way, then yes, I'm going to start keeping the Sabbath. But you might decide, well, I don't really care if it's God's way. It doesn't suit my life. So as it gets agitated, you've got to either make a decision for or against it. You might think, well, yeah, I know the Sabbath is of God, but it's not worth going to jail for. It's not worth, me losing my job for. So then you might just decide to keep Sunday anyway. So when we come down to this history, what was it about the Fugitive Slave Act? So you've got the North and the South, and you could be living in the North and you could be totally against slavery, or you could be for it. Just because you lived in the North wasn't necessarily that you were against slavery, you just happened to be born in the North. So you could be either way, right? But along comes this law, and now you've got to decide, well, no, this is wrong. Slavery is wrong. And you know what, it's worth making a stand for. Or you could say, it's actually not worth me getting a fine or going to jail or getting in trouble for. I'm just going to dob people in, because really they just need to be keeping the law anyway. I don't approve of it, I don't like it, but I'm not prepared to make a great stand. So that law is going to affect you. There's going to be an increase of knowledge regarding that law. It's going to become very clear in this history what the issues are, and you're going to have to make a stand. It affects you personally. Just like it would affect you personally, there's going to have to be an outward show. You can't say, well, I believe in Sabbath, but I'm going to go to church on Sunday anyway because I don't want to upset my family. You've actually got to not go to church on Sunday. You've got to go to church on Sabbath. It's something that needs to be seen. Down here in this history, would we think there's going to be any different? No. So you've got to come to a decision. Do I dob in that slave?
Sorry.
Oh, do I? Oh. Yeah, it is. Sorry. Do I turn them in? Thank you. I have an interpreter. Do I turn in somebody that I know is hiding in my area? Do I help these people, or do I just keep quiet? This law was actually not an improvement, but it was. There had already been similar laws previously, and the laws previous said that it wasn't up to you as an individual. It was up to the powers that be. So it was the police, it was the sheriffs, it was whoever was in the authorities. The authorities had to look for fugitive slaves and turn them in. Now with the Fugitive Slave Act, the ordinary everyday person had to turn them in. So it affected every person. You had to make a decision based on law. What law are we talking about? So there's a civil law that has come in to enforce this. There was going to be a civil law here to enforce Sunday. But what law are we talking about? It's the civil law versus the Ten Commandments, the fourth law of the Decalogue. What's this? The civil law versus what? The Ten Commandments. But which one? The last 6. So we have to bring these two histories together. It's the 46. It's if the controversy at the end of the world was only about Sunday law, it wouldn't be covering the whole Decalogue. Because that Sunday law is about our relationship to God. This Fugitive Slave Act is about our relationship to our fellow human being. How do we treat people? Are we prepared to stand up for people? Are we prepared to place our life on the line for somebody else? Because God was. And what is God? That's the test. And there would be an increase of knowledge on that. There would have been a formalisation of that message. It would have been very clear. Are you going to stand? Are you going to protect the vulnerable? And then there would have been a test. So our relationship with God and our relationship to our fellow man go together. And you know, and we'll talk about this a bit tomorrow too, because we're talking about the Decalogue, and the Decalogue is a law of love. Love cannot be expressed just in your relationship to God. It has to be expressed in your relationship to man. And that's why the message of equality has come in. Equality is showing how we can't go to the world and explain God to them unless we walk with God now in right relationship to each other. We have to get equality. Equality is about our relationship to each other within the movement, which will make us a powerful force to then go and explain it to the world.
And I think that's our challenge.
Oh, that's our test. Yeah, so that's we'll talk about that more tomorrow. What went wrong in 1850? Because we know that Jesus didn't come.
We're talking about the church?
Yes, so now, this was the test. These are the external events. What wakes us up? What makes us work is these external events. You know, prophecy is external events. So we've gone into the Laodicean condition. And the Laodicean condition is about losing sight of where you are in history. So we lose sight of prophecy. We know that from... So what did we do in 1850? What did the church do? They put a chart. And what was that chart for, the purpose of it? Evangelism. So we were right ready here to take our message to the world. What we needed to do was bring our understanding of our relationship to man in with our understanding of prophecy and take it to the world. But we went into that Laodicean condition. And Laodicea is when you lose sight of where you are because you're blind. Laodiceans are poor, blind and naked. So once you're blind, you don't know where you are. So they go into this state of blindness. We know that they don't turn into immoral people. They're good people. They're going to church. They're keeping the Sabbath really, really well. But they don't know where they are in history. And then what do they do with the 1850 chart very soon after? Reject it. So it's made and then never really used. And then we see more and more charts. We're familiar with that history. So the increase of knowledge that was meant to come as we combine our understanding of prophecy. What was on the 1850 chart? Everything. Everything. It was the 1863 chart and everything else. So we had real nice, beautiful little package. Then we had external events that were going to combine with our nice package and we're set. You know, we've got our lunchbox and our school uniform and we're all ready. Nothing else we need. Just didn't work out. So we go into Laodicean condition. We don't know where we are and we get very comfortable playing church. So this history then, as we know, ends up as a history of failure. And instead of us being more involved, I guess, we would have been drawn into what was being agitated at that time, which was slavery. We never really got drawn into that controversy because we had nothing to say. But if it had have worked out, we would have been drawn into this controversy. This would have still happened in some respect. That, you know, there would have been the plague, Jesus would have come, but what wouldn't have happened was that the civil war would have continued. And it's in that history here, because in 1863, then what did the church do? It became very settled, it became denominated. We made another chart, we made lots of charts, but we really started rejecting the prophetic message. Yes. So, we got organised. It was because we weren't going to finish the work here, God allowed us to be organised in a way that would, that we wouldn't dissolve, that would keep us together unified until God could begin another reform line.
Should they have been talking about the slavery issue?
Yeah,
part of their evangelistic mission?
They would have been drawn into, they would have had to have.
They would have had to.
There would have been no escaping it.
So it's the same today?
There are issues today we cannot escape. Okay. When we stand up for our fellow man,
finish off the work, we need to be addressing this issue.
When we get drawn into them. So in this time period now, nobody knows we really exist. However it happens, we are going to get drawn into those issues.
So we need to know what we're talking about.
Yeah, we need to understand what the issues are. Yeah. We need to understand that all men are equal. And we're still getting light on that. Because we like to, I think it's one of those things, it's like equality. We all believe in equality, and then until you have to put it into practice. And then it's like, oh, equality looks like that. So, we'll expand on that more in the next couple of presentations.
There was this case in England with William Fox. The Equalities Commission apologised to him and paid him a second out of court. And the whole doing looking at. So it's like equality in reverse.
Yeah, the civil authorities don't have it all right. What when we look at those fractal lines of the priests and the Levites and the Nethinims, one thing that we can bring from that is that the Nethinims are now being ploughed here. You know, we're not necessarily taking them we're not taking them their new light. All we're doing is we come down at the tail end of their experience and explain to them what God has to do with this. We explain God's involvement. So we're not the ones agitating.
They have to have seen this at the beginning.
They're being agitated by forces outside of us. And all we're going to do is, like they would have done, they would have taken their entire message to them, but it didn't need their entire message to wake up. You know, Joe Blow wasn't walking along in 1850 and then all of a sudden thought, oh, I think slavery's wrong. He's always known it's wrong. There's people that have always believed in it and they might have not liked it. It's like somebody who smokes and drinks. They know it's wrong, they don't want to do it, they can't give it up now, but they don't want their children to do it. Right? They don't want their grandchildren, they'd hate for their grandchildren to be smoking and drinking, but they're not prepared to give it up now. That was slavery. So a lot of the northerners, not the southerners, because by the time you get to there's a real movement within the southern people that, no, slavery's good. These people are better off here than in Africa, and we've got all the Bible texts, and we're looking after the elderly, and they're going to church, so it's better for them. So you've got people that are saying, they can give all the arguments why it's good. You've got people that can give all the arguments why it's bad, but then there's got to be a law to test it. You say it's bad, put your life on the line for it. You believe in the Sabbath? Wait till somebody holds a gun to your head. Wait till it doesn't even have to take that. Wait till you need to lose your job. So there's got to be a test. We say we believe something. There would have been a test down here, and it began here. So, but you know, we know that these things were agitated way back here with the founding of the Constitution. Slavery was always yes, it's been that right along. So, you know, you're not just suddenly confronted with it here. And it's the same with the Nethinims. There's nothing that they knew that they're going to be confronted with other than us bringing a biblical understanding to their experience. So that's the same here. So we go into the Laodicean condition, and have you got devices? If we can look up Testimonies Volume 1, page 264.1. And yes, 1T 264.1. This whole chapter, chapter 55, is called Slavery and the War. 1T 264.1. God is punishing this nation for the high crime of slavery. He has the destiny of the nation in his hands. He will punish the South for the sin of slavery, and the North for so long suffering its overreaching and overbearing influence. So who gets punished? Both the North and the South. At the conference at Roosevelt, New York, August 3, 1861. So she's down here right now where the test is. When the brethren and sisters were assembled on the day set apart for humiliation, fasting and prayer, the Spirit of the Lord rested upon us, and I was taken off in vision and shown the sin of slavery which has so long been a curse to this nation. So when did this happen? August 3, 1861. On what day? And what day would that be? So you're a Seventh-day Adventist, and it's a Sabbath, but what particular day is humiliation? It's ordinances. It's the day of ordinances, and what do you do on ordinances? You're meant to be washing feet. We'll look at that later. The fugitive slave law was calculated to crush out of man every noble, generous feeling of sympathy that should arise in his heart for the oppressed and suffering slave. It was in direct opposition to the teaching of Christ. God's scourge is now upon the North because they have so long submitted to the advances of the slave power. The sin of the northern pro-slavery men is great. They have strengthened the South in their sin by sanctioning the extension of slavery. They have acted a prominent part in bringing the nation into its present distressed condition. So, what is the fugitive slave law calculated to do? So what are we meant to have? Empathy for our fellow man. That's the whole purpose of the foot washing. On this day of foot washing, she's gone into vision and she's seen what the fugitive slave law was designed to do. No love for man, no empathy, no putting yourself in your brother's shoes, no generous feeling of sympathy. People were oppressed and suffering, and that is the direct opposition to the teaching of Christ. So, and then she says that's why the whole nation was in a distressed condition. I was shown that many do not realise the extent of the evil which has come upon us. They have flattered themselves that the national difficulties would soon be settled and confusion and war end, but all will be convinced that there is more reality in the matter than was anticipated. Many have looked for the North to strike a blow and end the controversy. So what were they looking for? It's all going to blow over. And the Northerners, they'll do the right thing. And what the Northerners did was they accepted this Fugitive Slave Act. They had lost empathy for their fellow man. They brought in a law, and instead of this blowing over, it just developed and developed and developed. So when we look at these histories, this history and this what would have been history, we bring them together and we're looking forward to Sunday law, we have an idea of the controversy that is going to take place. Because what we've learnt to do is to juggle ourselves on two lines. So I'm just going to we'll just ignore this line for the moment, but from the time of the end to the Sunday law, well, basically that's the history of the church, but I'm going to come here and I'm going to put the history of the priests here. So the history of the church includes the history of the priests and the Levites, which would take us from time of the end to Sunday law. Because once at the Sunday law, now God's got his church and he can now go to the world. So we know that God will have the priests ready by what waymark? We call that, so we've got 5 waymarks: 1989, 9/11, 2014. Oh, I'm a bit wonky, aren't I? 2019 and 2021. So 2021 will be our second Advent. So we're now in what dispensation? here. The increase of knowledge here, which gave us subjects like equality, racism, sexism, conspiracy theories. That's all the light of this previous dispensation. And we're no longer here. We're here. So we've got more light to come and an increase of knowledge on the issues that are going to lead us to 2021. So these were the issues that led us to 2019. Now we're expecting light that's going to increase and formalise that come to the issues of 2021. So we're here. At the same time, where else are we? If we're priests, we're here. If we're 144,000, where are we? We're here. Or we're here, if we were to look back. So, because of repeating patterns, what's the repeating pattern in this dispensation? An increase of knowledge, a formalisation, and then the Sunday law. So we would expect the formalisation of this dispensation when? 2021. We know the increase of knowledge came in 2019. So since 9/11, we've received an increase of knowledge, but it's yet to be formalised on what subject? Sunday law. We're here. So we're here, but we're also here. So do we know everything about the Sunday law yet? No, we can't. We've had an increase, but it's yet to be packaged. We haven't got great clarity. Once it's packaged, then we're ready for the test. So if we don't fully understand what Sunday laws looks like, there's a good reason for it. Because we don't fully understand about 2021 yet. Have we got a date? No. So we're heading to here, but we're also heading to here. But we know enough that we can put these histories together and we can see that law is about our relationship to God and our relationship to fellow man. Because whatever this controversy is going to be on, it's got to develop from our understanding of equality and conspiracy theories. Because what do conspiracy theories do? They create fear about who? Them. Whoever them can be anybody. Them can be people of colour, they can be people of nationality, they can be government, they can be... I got in Vancouver, I had to catch a shuttle to a hotel, and there was only me in the bus. So you get talking to the fella, and he starts talking about the coronavirus, and he says that, that people are cancelling because I said, how's your hotel going with all this? Oh, cancelled bookings. And he said, they made it to scare us. I'm like, who's the they? He doesn't know who the they are, and then on the way here, I'm sitting next to a lady, and as we fly in, I said, have you been to Jamaica before? She goes, oh yes, I was here on a cruise. And then she tells me she's a, what do you call them? A tourist.
Guide.
Yeah, she's not a guide. You know where you go to book your... Travel agent. She's a travel agent. And I said, so this must be affecting your business. And she says, oh, it's the media. The media just, said, so yes, it's all the media's fault. There's nothing, because her business is way down. So it's interesting when it hits your back pocket, whether it's the hotel you work for or the travel industry, then, the conspiracy, so you've got to blame who? People. You blame somebody else. That somebody else has a face. You know, there's real people. And so we have to understand conspiracy theories because they will affect our relationship to our fellow man. Equality, of course, stands to reason, whether it's racism or sexism or bigotry. Our relationship to other people's religions affects how we believe in our fellow man. And that's where the issue of the homosexuality comes in. We haven't got great light on that yet, you know, as far as understanding the nature of man as it concerns homosexuals. But at the same time, just treating somebody like a human being. It's just treating, I was talking to my brother earlier, fornication is fornication in any man's language, but you get fornication with heterosexuals and you get fornication with homosexuals. That's different. We're not talking about fornication, but we're talking about just looking at a human being and the worth of a soul. So God died for every living soul. So how do we look at them? You know, if they were the slaves of here, you know, would it be worth making a stand with somebody just to have a civil right? And that's another thing we need to understand, the difference between moral law and civil law, the purpose of government. So before man sinned, they were just under moral law. Once man sinned and started having families, and families started grouping together, and then you got villages, and then you got cities, what did God allow man to have? Civil law. The purpose of civil law is to do what? Keep people civil. Did you ever, you don't have children, right? But, you know, you have children in the back seat and they're fighting, and you go, can't you just be civil? You're not asking them to, I don't care if you don't love each other, just don't kill each other. That's what civil law is about. It's not about the love of person for another. It's about just not killing them, not stealing from them, not harming your fellow man. Civil laws don't speed. Why? Because you're considering the other person in the car that's either coming onto you or the pedestrian. The civil government isn't asking you to love your fellow man. It's just asking you not to run them over, not to crash into their car, because that has consequences. So civil laws are there to protect. We used to say they protect the godly from the ungodly. No, they protect man from his fellow man, whether they're godly or not. Every person has a right to be protected. So that's the purpose of civil government. So if we are morally right, then it's really easy to be civilly right. But if you're not morally right, then you need the civil laws. You need somebody to tell you, hey, you know, that particular speed is too fast. You need to. We've got them experts out there that have worked out what the safe speed is. So what do you have to do? You actually have to trust. You have to put a certain amount of trust in the leadership of government. That there are experts that just know how fast a car should go. It's the same within the movement. We have to trust the leadership. That God has put people in moral positions as well. And we have to trust their decision making. So when I'm driving my car, I don't need to know all the tests that some civil engineer or whatever, some expert has made to tell me how fast to go in the car. I don't need to know. I can just trust it. There's enough to know, isn't there? It's the same within the movement. It's enough to know that God has put people in leadership positions, and then we put our trust in them. They're going to guide us morally, just as we can trust the government to guide us civilly, unless we believe in conspiracy theories, and then you can't trust anybody. And then you're in a whole lot of mess. You'll find you won't be keeping the moral law or the civil law. So their civil laws are there to be broken Of course, I qualify that by saying that they could bring in this is a civil law that overrides a moral law. So we understand that.
Can the leadership make mistakes?
When it comes to civil government, when say you go to court and somebody A has done something to somebody B, and that all gets presented before, do you have magistrates here? Magistrates, whatever, judges, wherever they call them, magistrates. And all the evidence is given them. All the evidence that can be gathered is given them. And we know that that's a man-made institution. So can they make mistakes? Yes, it's man-made. But, you know, then if you believe in a conspiracy theory, then they're all out to get you and everything's corrupt. If we understand that men are just men and most men are just trying to do the best that they can, then once all that information is given to the magistrate, he takes that and he has to make a judgment based on everything he's heard. And he might say that person is guilty or that person is not guilty. But if, say, that person is guilty and there has to be some sort of finding handed down, you know, he's got to get so much time, probationary time or jail time or whatever, then that magistrate also has to go away with even more information, because then they've got to talk, you know, here how you have witnesses come up and say, well, it affected me this way. They put in their letters. They might write it out, they might speak it, they share their experience. You know, you took away my best friend. You know, I haven't been able to sleep, I'm on medication. You know, all that gets read before the magistrate. At the same time, the magistrate then goes into the background of the plaintiff, of the person who's done who's in trouble. And, oh, he's had a bad life, this has happened, whatever, you know. He's got to bring all that information together. It's the hardest job. And then we walk away at the end of the day and went, oh, that was so lenient. They should have locked him up. Or, why didn't he get more? That's always the case. You'll always see both. And there has to be a certain amount of trust in that civil government that they have made the best decision according to the information they have, and we don't have all the information. So we don't know the circumstances that went on in that person's life leading up to whatever it was. We don't know the effect that it's had on everybody's life as a cause, but that magistrate is presented with all the information. And that's why people get upset with the courts, is because we're not privy to everything. So this is where you have to put a certain amount of trust in leadership. Now that's the leadership of the civil government. It's open to mistakes. We have to trust, has God led us this far? Has God led us out this far? Yes. And now we're going to start making big mistakes? We have to trust. All these issues that are happening in our movement now, all this, equality, conspiracy theories, you can boil it down to one issue, and that issue is leadership. Because what happened in 2014? Leadership changed. It just wasn't seen. But that line won't lie. That line doesn't lie. And our leadership changed in 2014, whether we recognised it or not, believed it or not, followed it or not, it changed. And we can trust that leadership. You know, we need to have, Sister White says, we need humility and wisdom and courage and an increase of faith. And I think, you know, she doesn't say an increase of humility and an increase of courage, but we need the increase of faith, because we've got a certain amount of faith here, but our faith really needs building. And if we can trust the line, then we can trust how God's led us along the line. We have to know that there is stuff we don't know. We're not privy to everything. So can the leadership now make a mistake? I don't think the line can. I have faith in the way God has led this movement, that there are things that I don't understand. There are things that happen in my life that I don't understand. But I have to trust. If we don't start trusting in this, then we're tying ourselves up into this, conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories is information built on a lie, on mistruths. We're either in truth here or we're not. So we have to trust that sometimes things are done for the better good, for more than what we realise, for more than just one person. That magistrate makes a decision not just upon the massive amount of evidence he gets regarding those that have been hurt, but also the evidence that he gets by those that have done the hurting. He puts that all together and he makes a decision best for both parties. They can make mistakes, they can be corrupt, but for the most part they're just trying to do their best. The whole system isn't against us. Yes, down at the end of time, everything's going to be, once the world has been brought to this test, then yes, everything is just bad down here. But this side for the Nethinims, they're just trying to do their best thing. But we're not the Nethinims, we're not the Levites. We're the priests, and by the grace of God, we belong on this line too. And if we belong on these lines, then we have to trust how God has led us. And
the lines are not going to lie, but can people?
Yeah, people can lie. Go back to the story of the magistrate. There's no guarantee that all the information given that magistrate is all true. But he has to make a decision on the information that given. He cannot second guess all the information. You've got police reports, you've got witness reports, you've got, character. You've got information gathered from a period of time from as many people as you can. And then you have to make a decision on what you've got. And they do that, as I said, to the best of their ability. And you will always get people saying, should have locked him up, should have hung him, or, that was a bit rough. Because we don't get to, in those court cases, you don't get to read everything, you don't get to hear everything. But those people have gone through their education, they've gone through the process, they're just not, to be in that position. They understand rule of law, and they get appointed by people that understand rule of law. We have to understand that no man has appointed the people in leadership here. Do we believe that? That the people in leadership have not been appointed by man? Then when we come to that understanding, then you have to trust. There has to be trust. And then with that trust becomes obedience. And then with that obedience comes a blessing for everybody involved, even though we might not see it. So down here, let's take ourselves back into this history. We've got civil laws, but are they just? No. But we had leadership that should have taken us successfully through this history. We understand this is a history of failure because our leadership let us down. They lost sight of where they were. Is it a history of failure? No, we know it's a history of success. Then we have to put our trust in that. So we read from, where did we read from?
First week, for paragraph 3, and the last 4.
And how long have we been going for?
You have 20 minutes.
Okay. So we've looked at the slavery and war, and the war chapter 55 in First Testimonies. I'll just read a little bit about it actually. By 1843, several hundred slaves a year were successfully escaping to the north, making slavery an unstable institution in the border states. The earlier Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 was a federal law which was written with the intent to enforce Article 4 of the United States Constitution, which required the return of runaway slaves. It sought to force the authorities in free states to return fugitive slaves to their masters. So again, the Fugitive Slave of 1793 was to enforce authorities to turn in slaves. But many northern states wanted to disregard the Fugitive Slave Act. And then it goes on to explain that this new act was not just for authorities, but also for the civil population. I think I'll just leave that there. Yes. Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution. So, and hopefully over the next few presentations too, we'll talk a little bit more about the Constitution. We might do that now. So, if we go back into this history, the Constitution. Let's just go back here. And who's got the date for the Constitution? 1789. 1789, the American Constitution. So, why did they write this Constitution?
Because of England. They were subjected to England. So they were talking about their freedom, liberty from. They were being treated equal. So they brought out the point of equality and etc.
The Constitution is a law. So you're right. They were escaping England. They were escaping religious and kingly persecution. So when they got to this new glorious land, they escaped the religious persecution, but they were still tied to the King of England. So what did they decide to do? They decided to declare independence. So we're going to cut off ties from the King of England. We're going to be independent. So they declared it. They said, we're free. When they declared independence, maybe I'll just write a bit more room. So, 1773, Declaration of Independence. They declared it. What was happening in 1773? So they decided to declare independence from England, but what relationship were they in with England? What was happening between the two?
You had the Muslim Tea Party, so they were getting stuff from them per se. And they were taxed. They were taxed highly, heavily.
Yeah, because you've got to support the King of England. Yeah. So if he's your king, then you should be paying your taxes. So, you've got to support your government, right? So they decided, well, we don't want this government. We'll ditch this government. We're going to declare independence. And England took that really well, right? No. So what's happening here? This war, yes. So it's not war, civil war. It's the War of Independence. War of Independence. We're going to be independent, therefore we're going to fight for it. So what they did was independence. They declared themselves independent. Did they ask everybody? Like, did they take a vote? Did they go around all America and say, hey, what do you think if we declared ourselves independent? No, they just wrote it. There was no consultation, no petitions, no public meetings. You had a core of men that said, we're declaring independence and you are either with us or against us. So I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said, if we don't hang together, we're going to hang together. because this is treason, right? Realise what you're signing up for. We're either all in this or get off the island. Go back to Britain because we're fighting. No consultation. So they declared themselves independent. 1776, thank you. Good girl. 1776. Now, they've declared themselves independent. What does that mean? Not a lot. You need a law to prove that you're independent, to enforce the independence, to say that you're free, because this is all about freedom. So when they write the Constitution, how does the Constitution differ from the Declaration of Independence? Now they're asking people. Now you've got a group of, there was about 55 men, but not all of them hung around. There was about 39 men that sat around in a room and wrote this thing up. And did they just tell the people, okay, we're the bosses, this is what we're doing, like it or leave? No, very different. Now what they're going to do is they're going to take it to the people. So by this stage you've got so many states, I think it's 13 states in America, and they've all got constitutions. They've declared independence, they've organised themselves in their different states, they've got constitutions, they've got state government. So now they want to federalise. They realise it's not going to work real well if we're just 13 independent states. We need to have one currency, we need to have one military, we need to work together. Somebody to oversee, the government states. So what are they going to do with this constitution? They're going to take it to the states. And they're going to say, here state, what do you think about it? Well, what are the states going to do? They're going to take it to the people and say, hey, what do you think about it? This is a whole new world. So this is September 1789, when they wrote their constitution. September 16, what was the world like? The world was full of kings, moguls, overlords, sultans, dictators. There was no self-government except for these handful of states in America, Britain to a certain extent, and Switzerland. 3 countries in the whole world that were democratic. Until this. What happened when you went from September 16 to September 17 is, for the first time, we, the people, voted on their constitution. Did they vote on their Declaration of Independence? You didn't have a choice. Survivor, you get off the island, that's called ostracism. It actually comes from the Greek city-states in Athens. If you were ostracised, it meant you were kicked off the island. You had to agree. It was democratic, but if you had a voice against something, then you leave. That's what this was like, the Declaration of Independence. You can stay, but you shut up. And you can change your mind if you want to, and then we're happy for you to stay. But there was no correspondence entered into. This was all about the will of the people. What did the people want? So for the very first time in history, this piece of paper went to the states, went to the people. It didn't matter how much land you owned. They didn't matter what job you had. Didn't matter what language you spoke. If you were a free male, adult male, regardless of your background, regardless of your wealth, you got to vote. That is new. This is why secular people call this BC and this is AD. That history hinges on this point. Before the Constitution and after the document. It's the day they say changed the world. And we're living in a time when we're living in a time in 2020, and 50% of the world is now democratic. Ever since that date. This began an experiment, right? Based on this constitution, it began an experiment. And the world has largely followed suit. That's a huge thing in a short period of time. You know, we're talking about how many years, you know, the history, the world has been, and we finally get to this point and the people have a say. That's what's special about the Constitution. The Constitution, the paper itself doesn't mean anything. What made it strong is that people got to vote on it. It's the electoral process. So we're just going to end on this point. If we go to Testimonies, Volume 1, page 300.
Sister Terry, just a point.
Yes?
Then we can say that 1789 was a turning point for America. Was a turning point in that history.
You could say it's a turning point for the whole world. Because up till then, see, even when we talk about democracies and you think of imperial Rome, you're talking about something that was very local. If you talk about the democracies of ancient Athens and ancient Sparta, you're talking about just city-states. You're not talking about vast countries, you know, a vast continent. You know, America's it's a continent. And you're not talking about countries where you've got people living in hot and people living in cold, different languages, different religions. Athens, Sparta, imperial Rome, they played around with democracy. Even then, you know, you had to be wealthy. You had to live in that particular city. You knew everybody. It wasn't this huge thing that happened here that enveloped a whole continent and took in people of all different nationalities, different languages, different religions. This is entirely new. What did I say? First T 300. Oh, I didn't think that's not what I want. Oh, I'm sorry. I want great controversy. Let me just find it. Oh, sorry, 2 secs. Come on. Yes. Oh. I must be spelling it wrong. Why won't that work for me? That's because I'm... Okay, here we go. Okay, so Great Controversy 441. Oh, I should have remembered that. Great Controversy 441. Point 1. And he had 2 horns like a lamb. The lamb-like horns indicate youth, innocence and gentleness, fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophet as coming up in 1798. So obviously we're reading from Revelation chapter 13 and the United States. Among the Christian exiles who first fled to America and sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance were many who determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. Their views found place in the Declaration of Independence, which sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith was also granted, every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. The oppressed and downtrodden throughout Christendom have turned to this land with interest and hope. Millions have sought its shores, and the United States has risen to a place among the most powerful nations of the earth. Okay, so as we spoke before, people have left the old world for the new world. They have sought an asylum in the new world from royal oppression and priestly intolerance, from civil and religious oppression. They wanted to establish a government on the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty because they're escaping. They want civil liberty because they've had royal oppression, and they want religious liberty because they've had priestly intolerance. Their views found a place in the Declaration of Independence. So they have declared independence, and what is their view? What did they declare? All men are equal. All men have a right to live, to be free, and to own stuff, to have property. They have that right. And that's just a piece of paper until you've got a law that's going to do what? Enforce it. So the law that enforced this was, what do you call it? When they made it, ratified it. When they ratified it, it was ratified on the basis that the people, we the people, agree to it. Right through the articles and the amendments, even in the amendments, you'll see that phrase, the people, over and over again. That's the key to the strength of the Constitution. Because, I mean, anybody can make a law. I could make a law and say I'm Queen Victoria. You know, it means nothing. You would have to get everybody together and they'd have to say, yeah, hey, she's Queen Victoria. And if everybody said I was, then I would be. That's how it works. That's the power of people. By the people, for the people. But what does Sister White say here? And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government. Democracy. Democracy is self-government. It guarantees that right, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. What's this word mean? Because that Constitution guarantees freedom, providing that what?
Representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact the administer the laws.
So guaranteed if the people are represented, that they have representatives that they've voted for that are going to do two things. What are the two things they're going to do? Enact and administer laws. So, enact, we would call that, when we think of the American government, who enacts the laws? Legislative. And who enact and administer, which is? Administer, which is the judiciary. Judiciary. So that Constitution is only a guarantee to protect your rights What providing? What does providing mean? We could write if. We could write, we'll stick with if. We'll stick with if. But basically what it means. So what she's done is she's showed us here how you can get rid of the Constitution. What made the Constitution great here was the electoral process that ratified it. What's going to take it away down here is the electoral process. Do we have clarity on how that will take place? No, because we're here. But we do know when we look down at here, what was happening in 2014? What made 2014, what was one of the reasons that made 2014 such a waymark? Sunday law, because something came into being that was going to affect the electoral process. Cambridge Analytica, what are they going to start doing? Meddling with the electoral process. Because when you meddle with the electoral process, what are you doing? You're meddling with we the people. You're saying you're coming between the decision and the people, or the government and the people. You're putting yourself in, you're overriding the people, or you're manipulating the people. So we can see here that this waymark has something to do with the electoral process. We know that the Constitution, which is what, in order to enforce these laws, however they look like on our line, are going to have to do with the electoral process. So I think Sister White has given us quite a clue there. She has qualified how that Constitution guarantees the people the right to self-government. It is conditional. Our freedom of religious faith, everything, all our freedom we have is because the people have a right to say, is because we have this democratic process. And people, especially Americans, they can get kind of funny about, oh, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. It's a democracy in any man's language. It's the people, it's right, it's self-governing, and that's just detail. I mean, even Imperial Rome, when it was operating, the Republic was actually was democratic principles. Athens, Sparta, all those early ancient polises were democracies, but they weren't perfect democracies. This has been I don't think we fully understand really the enormity of what took place on September 17, 1789. Yes, it enforces this Declaration of Independence, but it's the process that it took to do that guarantees our liberty, not the document itself. So we're heading to what? We're heading towards an election. This is why we're kind of hung up on elections. Elections are going to have a lot to do with these, and the process of elections and the people's voice are going to play a big part as we head down to the Sunday law issue, whatever that looks like. So we know that it will involve an electoral process. Oh, and here's another thing in closing. So if you go to the Acts chapter 27, and you get to the Sunday law on that line, we're given a number, aren't we? We get to? And we go back to 273 BC, and what happens in 273 BC? We see Rome, diplomatic relationships with Egypt. Who did they send?
The
Maximum flood or Gurgis, which we say equals flood. The maximum flood, Sunday law. That's the last half of his name. What's the first half of his name? Yeah? So it's Fabius. I think it's Centus. Oh, it's like this. It could be, it means fifth. Whatever that is fifth. So that's maximum. What does Fabius mean? It's from the Faber bean. It's a family name. It's a bean. Faber bean. Because what did they do with the Faber beans? That's what they voted with. It's all to do with voting. A white bean was yes, and a black bean was no. They didn't have polling booths. They had beans. You were a bean counter. And that's how you voted people in. So the Faber bean, they have, yeah, you can look it up. So even 273 Sunday law, we can go back to Acts 27 and see the voting electoral process even in the name there. So let's close with prayer. Sister Susie, would you close for us, please?
Father, we thank you for the meeting today. Thank you for what we've learned. Thank you for enforcing the things that we've known before. We pray that we'll have a blessed night, have a peaceful night rest, and be able to come again tomorrow for another time together, Lord, as we unfold the things that you require us to know. We say thank you in Jesus' name.